The darkest day was also the greatest victory, and Good Friday is where the invisible worlds and the visible worlds collide. Hey, what's going on? It is Pastor Nate, and I am here with a special Good Friday edition of the Under God podcast. You know, the darkest day was also the greatest victory, and Good Friday is where the invisible worlds and the visible worlds collide. What looked like defeat, a rabbi beaten, humiliated, crucified, is in reality a decisive cosmic victory of God over all that enslaves humanity, sin, death, and the powers of darkness. In John 19:30, Jesus would say, "It is finished." But what exactly was finished? Let's walk through this moment, not just through the lens of human suffering, but through the lens of divine triumph. Jesus went to the cross for you and for me. But so much more was going on than might be what meets the eye. You've heard us talk on the podcast before about a guy named Dr. Michael Heiser. He was a great friend. He's unfortunately passed away, and a great theologian in his own right. But Dr. Heiser emphasized that the crucifixion, it was not merely a moment of sacrifice, though it was that. It was also part of an unseen war strategy, a cosmic ambush of the hostile spirits and powers that had ruled the nations since Eden and Babel. Now, Paul, he had this biblical worldview. He had this supernatural worldview of the Bible and of God and people and humanity. And so he would write this about what happened at the cross. Paul says that he, speaking of Jesus, he disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities. He shamed them publicly by his victory over them on the cross. That's Colossians 2:15. Now, these rulers and authorities are not human leaders, but rebellious spiritual beings who had enslaved the nations. And now Jesus is coming to deal with them once and for all. These are the powers that had blinded people, corrupted systems, worked in opposition to God's people and to God's kingdom for century after century after century. Now, the cross, it was certainly about making a way for sins to be forgiven, but it wasn't just about that. The cross was really like a cosmic takedown. And the Bible says that if the rulers of darkness knew what was going to unfold on that faithful day, if they knew, let's look and see what Paul has to say about that. Paul says that none of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. That's 1 Corinthians 2:8. If they knew what was coming, they wouldn't have done it. So why did they do it? They thought that they were getting the last word. They thought that they were engaging in the defeat of the Son of God. Instead, what they were actually doing was sealing their own judgment. They didn't understand the moment. And Hebrews chapter 2 talks about this moment as well. And here's what it says. Only by dying could he break the power of the devil who had the power of death. That's Hebrews chapter 2. So we're getting this whole picture that Jesus' death was about so much more than just saving you and me. That's true, but there's a process for that. And part of that process is breaking the stranglehold that the enemy had on people. Now, Jesus goes and takes on flesh and blood, not just to identify with us. He did that, but he also did it so he could die. And by dying, he destroyed the enemy who held death as a weapon. If Jesus just stayed as fully God, he can never die. That's why he had to become fully man. And this is not metaphorical. It's a military victory in spiritual terms. Now, the cross, again, it was a cosmic defeat of darkness, but it was also deeply personal. And this is some of the stuff that we're more accustomed to relating to. Isaiah says that he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. It's not just about the spiritual rebellion of the divine beings that rebelled against God. It's about you and me. We've rebelled against him too. When Jesus went to the cross, he hung on that tree and he took upon himself the sin of the whole world. And as he's sitting there with the sins of all of humanity, past, present, and future, he shouts out the words from Psalm 22 and says, my God, why have you abandoned me?" In this moment, Jesus is not only bearing the wrath of man, but the full weight of divine justice. He fulfills both the suffering servant of Isaiah and the righteous sufferer of the Davidic Psalms. He's both priest and a lamb in this moment. the Passover lamb, the ultimate Passover lamb. And early Christians saw Isaiah 53 not merely as a prediction, but really as an identity. This is who Jesus came. This is who he came to be. He didn't die just for us. He died as us. He took our place, bearing what we could never carry. And as all this is happening at the cross, it starts to come to a climax. All of these things are taking place at the same time. And in the middle of that, Jesus cries out again, and he says this, according to John 19, "It is finished." And I have to tell you that when he said this was not like a "it's finished" resignation, not like "I'm done, I'm out of here." This was a declaration of victory. Jesus was finishing something that needed to be finished. Of course, raise the question, what did he finish? Well, he finished, first of all, the atoning sacrifice for sin, the legal demands of the law. He finished a system that separated God from humanity, and he tore the veil so that we could literally communicate with heaven again. He finished off death. He finished the powers of darkness by disarming them. He absorbed all sin, all guilt, all shame, and he began the reverse of the exile of Eden. He did so much more than this. But when Jesus said, "It is finished," remember, he wasn't giving anything up. He's saying, I won. I've finished my job. I've done what I was supposed to do. And in John's gospel, we see Jesus is lifted up, not just onto the cross, but really onto his throne. They give him a crown made of thorns. His robe is soaked in blood. And his title is nailed above his head, King of the Jews. Now, even as they mocked him, they spoke what was true about him. Think of this. Even as they're mocking him, they're actually saying what is true. He is the King of Kings. Now, before we finish this episode, and this won't be a long one, on this Good Friday, I do want to talk for a minute about this idea of where Jesus went after he died. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of stories and different things that people say, and they pull things from different passages. And many people talk about how Jesus went to hell. And you'll hear people talk about how he wrestled with Satan for the keys to hell and all of this. And the truth is, I have to tell you, sorry if this is something you believe, it's really not that scriptural. In fact, a lot of it is conjecture, and some of it is just good old fiction. Now, sometimes the best thing that we can do if we want to answer a question about Jesus is to see what he had to say for himself about those things and about his final moments. So if we go back to Luke records Jesus as saying this in his last moments. In Luke 23, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," or I entrust my spirit, as another version says. And as Jesus' body goes into the tomb, we have to wonder, well, where does his spirit go? Now, first of all, we know what he just said. He said, "My spirit into your hands." And can I just tell you, the hands of God are not bound up in hell. But let's unpack this a little bit more. So you have this Old Testament and even first century cosmology of the abode of the dead. It gets referred to as Hades, Sheol, Paradise, Gehenna. These are all different terms kind of talking about the same thing. Now, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament alike, there's this idea that the dead go to Sheol, which is the Hebrew word for the abode of the dead, or to Hades, which is the Greek word for the abode of the dead. Now, neither of these necessarily speak to a place of torment. It's just the place where dead people go, and it's the place where dead people are waiting. Now, within this realm, in both Old Testament and first century cosmology, they had an idea that the inside of Sheol, inside of Hades, there were two different places. First of all, there's something referred to as paradise, or Abraham's bosom. And this is the place inside of Sheol where the righteous dead go. Now, then you get this other idea of Gehenna, or even Tartarus. And this is the place where the wicked dead go, and also where imprisoned spirits are being held inside and under the earth. So these terms, Hades and Sheol, they're more than just general terms for the place of the dead. They're the starting place, and then within that, you have these other places. Early Christians and early church traditions understood that Hades was divided. And they get this from the story that Jesus told about Lazarus and the rich man, which you can find in Luke chapter 16. It goes for about 12 verses there or so, where he's telling this story, a parable. It's one of the only parables, actually, I think the only parable, where Jesus names someone, which is why people think it's more than a parable. And in that parable, Jesus refers to Abraham's bosom as a place of peace, while the rich man is in torment, and both await final judgment. But remember what else Jesus said in those final moments. So he's got that in mind. He's the one that told the parable about there's the bad place and there's the good place, all wrapped up inside the place called Hades. As he's on the cross, what else does he say? Jesus says to the thief next to him, today you will be with me in paradise. That's Luke 23:43. Now, Jesus, I don't think he's speaking of heaven per se as we think of heaven, but he's talking about paradise, which in their worldview at that time would have been a place contained inside of Hades, the resting place for the righteous dead. So Jesus is saying, I'm going to the realm of the dead, but I'm not going to suffer. I'm going to paradise. And I think he's going so that he can proclaim that he was about to defeat death and begin the liberation project for those who had been faithful to Yahweh and were in the place where the righteous people go to die. And this is what he tells the thief on the cross. Today, you'll be with me in paradise. Now, while we're thinking about the thief on the cross, imagine this guy getting to heaven. Alistair Begg does a great bit on this, and I'll try to do my best to do it justice, but he sort of makes up the story about what might have happened when the thief on the cross gets to paradise, and we'll just call it heaven for the sake of the story. But could you imagine? He gets to the gates, and he's asked, why are you here? How did you get here? And he's like, I don't know. Where did you come from? I was on a cross. You were on a what? How did you get here? I don't know. Well, why don't you tell us your theology of divine sovereignty? The thief on the cross might say, I don't know what that means. Tell us about how you kept all of the law. I don't even know about the law. Well, tell us, surely you've made some sacrifices and paid your tithes. You can imagine him saying, what's a tithe? Well, tell us about the good deeds that you've done for others. To which he would probably say, I'm actually a really bad guy. I was just getting crucified for stealing from other people. I'm not a good man. I haven't done good deeds. And you can imagine at the gates how confused they must be. Then tell us, they would probably ask him, on what authority should we let you in? I can imagine the thief on the cross saying, I don't really know what all that means. All I know is that I was on a cross, and there was another man in the middle, on the cross in the middle, and he said that I could come, and I believed him. Friends, that is the message of the gospel. The man on the cross in the middle, he took your sin with him, and he said, you can come. Now, as we go back and finish the conversation about where he went when he died, I want you just to remember, he died so that you could be with him forever. Now, 1 Peter 3 does talk about how he went and preached to the spirits in prison. And this is a kind of a weird verse. And this is where some people get some of the other story I mentioned earlier and conflate things. But it says that he was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. So he went and preached to the spirits in prison, those who disobeyed God long ago when God waited patiently while Noah was building his boat. Now, there's a lot of theories about what this means. And my honest answer, like, Pastor Nate, tell us what this means. My honest answer is actually, I don't fully know. I don't think you know for sure. It's not spelled out precisely. But I do think that there's some ideas that we can glean from it. And we can glean from other parts of Scripture. First of all, we know from the book of Jude that those divine beings who rebelled against Yahweh, Genesis 6 stuff that we've talked about before, they were imprisoned. Jude said it was held under the earth. That's what it says. Now, if these are the spirits that Jesus went and preached to, he's probably not preaching the gospel message. I don't think that he's giving them a second chance. I think he's preaching a declaration of judgment and of victory. The King of Glory walks near the prison and says, I win. You guys rebelled against my Father. You rebelled against our kingdom, but I win. This is not Jesus coming to give these spirits a second chance. He's telling them that their failure is final in judgment. Well, it's begun. Now, if he didn't go to hell, then how did he preach to those who were in prison? That's a question I sometimes get. There are people who think Jesus went to hell. I don't think the Bible never says that. It says the opposite. Today you'll be with me in paradise. Now, again, the answer to the question is we don't fully know, but if we think back to Jesus' story of Lazarus and the rich man, the two men were somehow able to communicate from one place to the other. So you've got one guy in paradise and another guy in a not good place, and they're still talking to each other. So my money is on that. Jesus was not in the prison they were in, but he was in the realm that they were in, and he was therefore able to communicate to them and to let them know, again, I won, and your judgment is final. So on Good Friday, as Jesus' body hangs on the cross, lays still, his spirit descends to the spiritual heart of death's domain, not in defeat, but in dominion. He proclaims judgment to the rebellious spirits, freedom to the righteous dead. And as all this is going on in the spirit world, the natural world is experiencing some weird things too. I would call it maybe some cosmic upheaval. The Bible tells us that during this time, while this stuff's going on, darkness covered the land. Now, this is a symbolic judgment that's referenced in Amos 8:9. We also see that the temple veil is torn and access to God is now open. Heaven is open now for people to talk to the Father, to the throne room again. That's Matthew 27:51. We also see that an earthquake strikes, and when the earthquake happens, other graves open. That's Matthew 27. It says this: many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead and appeared to many people. Think of that. As Jesus goes into the grave, the power is so intense. Some people are resurrected to life right then and there. Even the earth and the underworld responds to the death of the Christ. This is all a sign that the old world is passing away. There's something brand new that's breaking in. This is why it's called Good Friday, that we sit and we think about the death of Jesus. And I hope that you attend a service tonight and hear more about that. But it's a Good Friday. And as we start to close out this Good Friday episode, there's a few questions that I think you should ask yourself. When you think about the cross of Jesus, do you see your victory in the cross? Do you see your victory in him? When you think about the cross and you take your communion elements, do you really understand the depths that Jesus went to bring you life? Have you let his finished work of the cross shatter every lie of shame and defeat in your present? And if you haven't, I think the time to do that is right now, for you to do exactly that, to say, Jesus, thank you for going to that cross for me. Remembering the cross, being thankful for the cross, and then embrace the victory of the cross. Jesus, bring the power of the cross into my heart, into my life. Put to death in me the things that need to die, and bring life to the things that need to live. This is the message of the cross. This is the message of Good Friday, that the perfect Son of God, who did not deserve to die, was killed on the Roman cross for you and for me. The sins of the whole world, again, past, present, and future, laid upon him. And in one fell swoop, he defeats the powers of darkness. He defeats the power of sin and death. He defeats the system that had kept God and man separate, tears the veil, and makes a way. And as he goes into the earth, he does some important work. But the most important thing that he would do would be just a few days later. I want to encourage you to join me back tomorrow, as we're going to have actually something to say on Silent Saturday as we move towards Easter Sunday. God bless you, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Under God Podcast on Good Friday.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Under God Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and leave us a review. Your support helps us reach more people with our content. You can stay connected with us on Truth Social, Facebook, Instagram, and Getter. And don't forget to subscribe on Rumble, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify so you never miss an episode. You can also access show notes and other resources on our website at undergodpodcast.com. See you next time, and remember to think biblically about the things that matter most.